Hello, all. Waiting for some of you to get in. Just going to give it a couple more minutes as people decide where they're headed. Hello, everybody. So nice to see people. I'm Stacy London. I'm going to be your moderator for this panel today on adaptive and inclusive fashion, what that means and where it's going. And I am very lucky to be the moderator for three panelists who have incredible insight into this conversation. I'm going to start off by introducing Andrea Levant, who is the founder and president of Levant Consulting. You, I believe, Andrea, were diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy at 2 years old, and you have been working in the social impact communication firm that you founded, which helps brands speak disability with confidence, to me, which was just an absolutely great line. I know you're also the impact producer of Crib Camp that was put out by Netflix and produced by Higher Ground, Barack and Michelle Obama's production company. And I know that you are always pushing for inclusive fashion and beauty, that you are, I heard you put on your lip before. I know you care. I can't wait to talk about that. Next, let me introduce Jimmy Zolo. Jimmy is the co-founder and CEO of Joe and Bella, which is an adaptive apparel brand that makes dressing faster, safer, and more dignified for older adults living with cognitive changes. That keyword being dignity, to me, was a really, really important one when we started to talk about this. And finally, Nicole Petrie, who is a model, activist, and caregiver. She became a caregiver when she got her mom's FTD diagnosis, frontal temporal dementia.
Yeah,
yes. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I got that right. And she's been raising awareness about dementia and related diseases because she is a model and has a social media of about 1.1 million followers, and has been able to do videos talking about caregiving and also about her mom, and the hard work that it requires to be a caregiver. And I think that everybody here can relate to that to some extent. And we're going to get into it. So my first question is really for all of you. When we talk about adaptive and inclusive fashion, what are we talking about? And Andrea, I'm going to start with you here. What does that mean to you?
It means, what I love about the concept of inclusive fashion is fashion in general it's inclusive. It's a universal language. And I think that when we say inclusive, we mean for everyone. But I think that fashion has a unique ability to just speak across all languages, to include everybody, whether it's texture and you can feel, or whether it's, the swoosh of the fabric of the sound, or whether it's what it looks like. That in and of itself is inclusion, right? Like, you can bring your entire self to it. And I think, when we add the idea of inclusive fashion, then it's really thinking about every single body, no matter what that looks like. So yeah.
And Nicole, what about you?
I think Andrea hit it on the head that, like, there are so many things that most people would not think about when it comes to inclusivity. And there's so many challenges that people living with dementia face every day. And I think when we really start to think about it and think about solutions, there's so many different things that we can come up with. And Jimmy, I know, has done an amazing job at starting that and doing that. And I think also, just from the caregiver perspective, that I recently started a line of merchandise that is aimed to honor and just kind of show appreciation for caregivers. And when you're wearing the clothes out into the public, you're kind of wearing your caregiver status with pride. So,
which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Jimmy, what about you?
Yeah, I would say most clothes are just not designed for every body type, or most body types, or aging body types. And so at Joe and Bella, we try to design universally. We try to look at the highest level of need, the most acute need, and see how we can solve for that. Because as our bodies change, as we age, as our abilities change, we should simply still be able to wear clothes that we love, clothes that look and feel like us, because that level of our personal identity never goes away. And I think there's something really powerful about still being able to look in the mirror and feel comfortable in what you're wearing. Because as you change, if you lose that, if you lose the ability to wear what you've always worn, or to wear what makes you comfortable, I think there's a really challenging emotional piece there. And so that's what our goal at Joe and Bella is, just to make clothes that are what people want to wear, that are comfortable and look and feel like what they've always done.
And I think what I hear from all of you is really that this is the power of self-expression. That is not, if we think about the fashion industry as it is, most people would say that that's quite exclusive, not inclusive. And the idea that we're having this conversation around the power of self-expression for all kinds of people is something that maybe the fashion industry is starting to get a hold of and starting to get their heads around. But I wonder if we're moving A, fast enough, and B, if we could maybe even talk about this in terms of the way that we've seen body inclusivity over, let's say, the last 10 years in fashion become a much bigger deal than it ever was before. And if, this is a question of enough voices then start to actually bring about change. And these, brands that obviously are in the business of making money want to satisfy the consumer. Nicole, excuse me, Andrea, I want to start with you here. You said that you are committed to dressing for yourself, not to compensate for your disability or for people to overlook it. And for me, that was a very profound statement, right? Because you're giving acknowledgement to disability and you were saying that is not all of me. I want to express myself in fashion, right? Do you think that brands are actually paying enough attention to people with disabilities or sensory sensitivities or cognitive issues? Do we think that fashion brands actually think, oh, this is a whole population of people who want to look fashionable like everybody else? Or do you think that that desire has actually been ignored largely in the fashion industry?
I love this question. No, I don't think that the fashion industry has acknowledged the power of inclusion when it comes to disability. And I know we have, specific disabilities we're talking about, but overall, when we think disability it's the world's largest minority group. 1 in 4 people here, even in America, are disabled, and with all form of disabilities, and yet that remains the population. We remain as a people, a population that is still often, not considered or overlooked. And, I think it's deeply unfortunate, because I say this a lot in our work, that when we talk about innovation and fashion, disabled people in general are the most innovative people you can ever have be a part of something, because we operate in a world that wasn't built for us in the first place. So think about the ability to bring that to fashion and the idea of the self-expression. And for me, the quote that you shared was about, I used to actually, growing up, I saw fashion as a way, okay, to get people to not see my disability. Maybe if I look great, or, they comment on my clothes or my shoes or whatever, then they won't see, or acknowledge the disability. And I think, what I am grateful for as a society, that I see is people, us having more of a space and a platform to fully demonstrate pride in who we are. And I think that the fashion industry just now has an opportunity to match that, because I'm very proud of who I am as a disabled person. We just need the industry to get on board, to demonstrate that.
Yeah, exactly. And, Jimmy, this is what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Joe and Bella and how it was actually created, what inspired it, because I think that you are both thinking about the person who is being dressed and the person who is dressing that person. Right. I see that, Joe and Bella sort of looks at both sides of this situation. So could you talk a little bit about the origins of Joe and Bella and why that became important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So our goal is definitely to make independent dressing more possible, while also making clothes that makes assisted dressing easier and faster and safer for both the person that's wearing the clothes as well as the care partner, because care partners can get hurt helping someone get dressed or helping someone go to the bathroom. So we founded Joe and Bella because my grandmother, she was living in a memory care community outside Chicago. She was living with dementia. She was a wheelchair user. She couldn't lift her arms over her head. And the interesting thing about the pandemic is it allowed us to see her life through a different lens, because normally when I would go and visit her, she'd be ready. She'd be fully dressed, her makeup would be done, her hair would be done. But the pandemic, you get what you get, and you were grateful for getting it. So we would FaceTime a caregiver there, and they'd be able to run onto her room. And in one of those times, my grandmother was still getting dressed, and I'll never forget it. It's the first time in my life I ever heard my grandmother swear. And it
Wow.
was the process of just moving her arm back into her sleeve was excruciating. And I remember calling the caregiver up afterwards, who, by the way, was kind and patient and did everything right. It just, clothes were not designed for my grandmother's body. So we went to see what was out there, and there are few brands that promise to make dressing easier and less painful. And I would, I guess, nicely describe them as hospital attire. But I figured, hey,
Yeah.
I'd rather my grandmother not be crying in pain every time she gets dressed. So I ordered a few items, sent them to my grandmother, and waited to hear what she thought. And when I finally got her back on the phone, she said, "No, I'm not going to try anything on. It's too ugly." And this is my grandmother at this point, 92. There were days she didn't know my name, but she could still look at a package of clothing and say, "No, I will not wear that." And that was the genesis of Joe and Bella.
And talk a little bit about the features of the clothing, because I think it's actually quite important to talk about what you are creating in the line. I know that you use magnets instead of buttons for the shirts. You have a patented zipper for pants. Talk a little bit about that. How did you go back and forth in sort of deciding what would be best in this situation?
Yeah, the process for each product takes at least a year to design, to develop, to test, to get to market. If not longer, we've been working on a nightgown we're about a year and a half into it, and we're still not happy with where it's at. But we started with a lot of foundational research, both quantitative research to see what was out there online, to see what people liked, what they didn't like, what was missing from the market, as well as qualitative research. So interviewing memory care nurses and caregivers, to the individuals who are wearing the clothes, to individuals at home who are helping a loved one to get dressed. From there, we go about developing the product. So we have pants that are specifically designed to be worn with an incontinence brief. That's the patent that you mentioned. So it has a unique zipper system that has 2 zippers down the side, as well as a 3rd inseam zipper that allows the pants to fully open up. So if someone's wearing an incontinence brief, they can get that changed without their pants having to come all the way off. If they were just wearing a normal pair. And the other element is, yes, it has this function, but the function doesn't matter if the fit and the form isn't right. And so what we recognize with, man, you're talking about pants for being worn with incontinence, is how do we make sure that if there's an empty brief being worn, that the fit looks right? And then if it's a brief that's frankly overflowing, how does it still look dignified? And that took us a while to get, and we had some very brave designers who helped us test that, and would wear briefs, and we'd fill it up with as much water as we could to eventually get that fit to a point where we're really happy with it now.
Which is also just amazing in terms of the time and care and thought that you're giving to this. I think honestly that is what we're gonna hopefully see from other brands. My big concern sometimes is that I think that people see, oh, adaptive and inclusive clothing is coming in. Got to check that box. Got to check it, no matter whether we're doing the work or not doing the work. Nicole, I want to ask you a question before I go on to a broader topic. Have you been able to create a sense of safety and comfort with your mom and caregiving? I mean, I saw a video of you putting lipstick on your mom that I thought was, it was heart-wrenching to me, but part of it was like so joyous because you were truly trying to include her in the experience that you were providing and, that you were already involved in. How does that feel to you when you think about what makes her comfortable, how to take care of her, really in terms of clothing, beauty, fashion, all of that stuff? what does that mean to you and what does it mean to her?
Yeah, I mean, I think that video is kind of a perfect full circle moment because I grew up watching her putting lipstick on and having her put it on me. And now the tables are a bit turned, which is both sad and just a bittersweet kind of moment there. But I think my mom very much influenced my love of beauty and fashion. And I've seen pictures of her my entire life, of her in the 80s with her eccentric outfits. She was definitely a bit of a fashionista. And growing up, I didn't see that as much in person because she was a stay-at-home mother of 3, and she was taking care of 3 girls and more worried about what we were wearing than she was, which I think is a very common thing that happens with mothers and caregivers. And I've even seen it happen with myself a bit. You know, there's days when I'm out and I'm doing modeling jobs or at an event and I'm in a very dolled up outfit. And then there's the days when I'm just at home taking care of my mom, and I'm usually just in sweats and pajamas with her. And even dressing her, just kind of the same thing, keeping her in clothes that she's comfortable in, that she's warm in, that are easy to get her in and out of for bathroom changes, and just a lot of the things that Jimmy said. That the same thing, my mom, she's like stiffens her arms a lot, which is common for people living with dementia. And so getting her in and out of sleeves can be extremely difficult. But we've figured out different techniques and different clothing that works better for her. For example, like zip up sweatshirts are much easier to get over the back than over the top of her head, like a sweatshirt like that. Or my mom has gone through a lot of weight fluctuations throughout her diagnosis. And so drawstring pants are great because you can just adjust them to wherever she's at the moment. And so different things like that for sure.
Well, I'm also curious, this is sort of more of a general question that I wanted to go back to. I think there are a lot of people who talk about the fact that, you know, we should be sort of designers, whether we're talking about high fashion, low fashion, mass fashion, whatever you want to call it, to be thinking about adaptive and inclusive clothing and thinking of that as care. And I had like a little bit of a aha moment with that, because what I felt is, again, just using the sort of body positivity movement as an example, as a parallel example. One of the things that I realized very quickly was that all of these brands jumped on this wagon and said, okay, now we're going to make extra, extra, extra small all the way to 5X, which is a size 32. And the thing about that is, if you don't actually take the time to know how to do that, you cannot use the same pattern for an extra, extra small that you're going to use for a 5X. And if you claim that you're making clothes for that range of sizes, then you're either making pretty crappy clothes that don't fit very well, or, you know, you're just saying it again to check off a box. You're not actually thinking or taking the time to really think about what the needs of this consumer is going to be. So for me, I was like, no, I don't want everybody to do this. I don't want everybody to do this and be able to, you know, think that they're so great at it and check the box and, you know, give themselves all a pat on the back. I think the idea of adaptive and inclusive clothing should come from the people who need it the most, because I think that way you are getting, then you go to the biggest designers in the world, you go to the biggest outlets in the world and you say, we have done the research, this is what you need to do to succeed. I'm curious to know if you all feel the same way, or if you feel like, no, to get the word out there, we need to be as loud as possible and get as much visibility with brands as possible.
I would say we need to be as loud as possible for the brands that are doing it right.
Right.
I'm with you. I think adaptive is so easy to get wrong and so incredibly hard to get right. There are so many nuances to the fit, the form, the function, the type of zippers you use, the length of the zippers, the strength of the magnet, how it's encased, every single detail. It takes dozens of prototypes to get right. And I think there are brands out there who are making what I would consider faux adaptive. So they want to check that box. They want to show that they're being inclusive. But what that ends up doing is, if someone's first introduction to adaptive apparel is a product that actually doesn't serve a purpose, that it actually doesn't help somebody, that hurts the market as a whole. So our ability, and I'm grateful for HFC to shine a light on the brands that are doing things the right way and are trying to make products and being really thoughtful about what they do and how they help, because that innovation coming from the startups and some other larger brands like Nike's doing some amazing things right now, is incredibly helpful and will lift up the tide, and hopefully, maybe licensing agreements down the road can be how they go about it.
Andrea, what are your thoughts?
I think what you said is super important. It's who's at the helm of the, of the development. And so often it blows my mind, particularly in the fashion and in the entertainment industries, that stories, products, everything can be made without disabled people or, the people with the experience being a part of the process, and going, oh yeah, we want to just kind of randomly address or make something quote inclusive without having people with the lived experience be a part of it. And so to your point, as a wheelchair user, like, people can say that something is designed for a seated position, but it really takes, thought and care, and it's not going to be the same. It's not to put a pant, on somebody that's standing versus sitting. There are certain things that you can do, I think, to make things a little bit more universal. But and we may talk about that, but I think even sometimes there's nuance when it comes to universal and like the idea of, even inclusive, because it's not, sometimes it's not one and the same to make something, quote, universally designed, because it can't, it's just not quite possible sometimes.
Right. And it's interesting. Donna Lawrence just said to everybody in the chat, nothing about us without us.
Yes.
And what a great slogan. And Jessica Gonzalez was also saying adaptive clothing also has a market for people who are recovering from procedures. There is a huge financial incentive there. Even without people recovering from procedures, I think there's a huge financial incentive. But Nicole, again, I want to get your thoughts before we move on to other questions.
Yeah, I think I've been in the modeling industry for 10 years and I started my caregiving journey right around the same time. And I think there has been some improvement in inclusion on the mainstream modeling side of things, fashion side of things. But I think when we really look at it, we need to be, my main thing is that I'm trying to raise awareness for dementia within the mainstream. But in order to do that, and the best way for me to do that is to elevate the voices of the people who are going to be wearing and using those products, like Andrea and like my mother and so many others. And like you said, there are, even without the financial incentive, people with procedures, there's an extremely large growing population of people living with dementia. So
yeah,
it's going to be needed.
It's definitely gonna need it. Well, I am curious just to go back to this idea that you were talking about, Andrea, this idea of like maybe some universal design components that really, how can we think about adaptive clothing when we're thinking about universal design? What are some of the issues that might be helpful when we are trying to think about ways in which to be at least fluid in terms of creating adaptive clothing? What are some of the principles that you would probably recommend first?
Can I start? I don't know.
Oh, yes. Sorry, the question was for you.
Yeah, perfect. So, I mean, I think that, and I was thinking, even Jimmy, some of the pieces that you've already spoken to, just in terms of how you all approach or consider the idea of universality. For me, it's things like closures and, entry, magnetic closures, for example, just how we enter and even exit. Sometimes it's things that it's pull tabs. It's things that just that you can tuck in, that you don't even, oh wow, this is cool. I think a lot of times what we find, and I think you know, even when we talk about universal design, it's really the fact that we use the ramp as an example of that. Like, yes, the ramp, the wheelchair ramp was initially designed, and the people that were at the helm were disabled people, but it benefits so many others, you know, strollers and UPS people and all of that. And so similarly, I think when we talk about that in fashion, it's, for example, you know, I'm today wearing a kimono style jacket, but it has no sleeves. It just like lays over me. And so it's things like that, because inclusive fashion, the going into a store with stuff that's specifically designed for me doesn't exist, but I'm looking at things
Not
going,
yet.
okay, this was, and this works for me because of, you know, the way that it's designed. And I found that, you know, pieces like that that have this versatility. There's also, it's a kind of has a one size fits all, as another thing that I think, even in the industry, when it comes to disability representation, like for myself, I am not just disabled, I'm a plus size disabled person. So then you add like another layer to it, and once again, I'm looking for even more. I have hips, I'm, you know, got the Black girl body. There's things to consider that I think, again, in the universality, that language that I just see as opportunity to go, okay, how can this fit as many, you know, folks with specific needs as possible?
I think it's interesting that you bring up the ramp, because I'll tell you, there's also a parallel just in healthcare. Certainly, like when you go down this rabbit hole of the more marginalized of the most marginalized communities, that if we are actually serving them, then we're serving everybody.
Exactly.
You know, it was the same thing as having elevators in subways. That's not just right. It's not just about only one section of the population being able to do that. And I wonder, do you, Jimmy, you know, obviously you're thinking about that specifically for your company. When you talk about companies like Nike, do you see that kind of innovation as something where they are thinking about sort of the most marginalized of the marginalized, recognizing that starting at that level is what brings everybody else up, is, you know, that you don't necessarily need to have adaptive clothing to enjoy adaptive clothing?
Right, I think so, and I believe that's the goal. Whether that's Nike, another footwear brand called Kizik did the same thing. Kizik developed a shoe that has a collapsible heel. Their founder did it just because he didn't like tying his own shoes. Well, it turns out that's a fantastic solution for someone who just had ankle surgery, someone who's pregnant, or a 95-year-old woman, or someone in a wheelchair. That is just a beautiful example of universal design that came out of just someone being annoyed about having to tie their shoes every time they left the house.
Right.
So that's I think the aspiration for what we want to do. The true north is, hey, can we make a product that works for everyone? We recognize that's not always going to be the case, that there are going to be certain fit requirements, particularly with pants. Pants are tricky, where the pant rises, where the pockets are located. That's not always going to work for everybody, but we think there are unique functions that could work for everybody. So for example, the shirt I'm wearing right now is one of our adaptive shirts. So all the buttons are fake. There are magnets underneath it. We have elastic in the cuff. So this is a fake button, and the elastic stretch pretty far all the way around. So if someone had a stroke and can only use one side of their only has used one hand, or if they have arthritis or Parkinson's, they can put this shirt on by themselves. But for me, I don't have to do the buttons anymore, and it saves me time. So why wouldn't I rather wear it? So I think the added benefit there is it then destigmatizes this idea of adaptive. And I don't even like the word adaptive, by the way, because it makes it feel like the clothing is something for other people. And I think our goal is, hey, let's just make really great clothing that happens to make dressing safer, faster, easier for everybody. And that byproduct is where we're going to be helping a really wide group of people.
So, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because again, that is a little bit speaks to the same question I had before. I feel like we need the word adaptive in order to raise consciousness about what that actually means before we can get rid of the word adaptive. And, you know, it's one of those things where if you're not actually kind of creating consciousness around the needs of this population, then you can't sort of integrate it into the entire population. Otherwise, it loses some of its, the exacting nature of the design, just like what you're talking about. So, I agree. That's a world in which we need to get to. We don't get there without, figuring out what are the things that are going to be the most important to this community. And then that community just becomes integrated with everybody else. And I think that idea of the multiplicity of use value is something really interesting when we're trying to talk to a larger audience. I'm also curious what you guys think about retail experience, both for caregivers. So Nicole, I might start with you here. If you are, what would optimize a shopping experience if you were going to take your mother shopping? What would be an ideal layout for her? What is the environment in which you would feel safe to do that with her?
Yeah, I will get to that in a second, but I did just want to say that while Jimmy was explaining that, I was realizing I need that shirt because I can't button anything with these nails. And I know I see Andrea's nails as well. I can't do anything with them on, so that would be perfect. And I think a lot of those innovations, I've even discovered, like I said, I've been modeling and caregiving for 10 years. And in those 10 years, I've made so many discoveries of these innovations, and I'm still discovering them. Even just like a couple of months ago, another caregiver, her name's Alma, and she takes care of her mom. She posted these hats that had built-in helmets in them. And I was like, this is genius. I've never even thought about this. It's because my mom is a fall risk. And so I thought that was amazing. But going back to the shopping experience, I just posted a video a couple of days ago about taking my mom out in public and how that can be a very, very stressful situation for caregivers because you're so worried about so many different aspects of what could happen, and just their comfortability and how they're going to be behaving that day. And I think there's definitely certain things that retailers can do. My mom loves music, so playing music at like a low level would be great. I know some people are sensitive to light, so controlling the light, having big dressing rooms that can accommodate a caregiver, things like that.
Andrea, would you add anything there?
Yes, I am known for getting to the door of a store and turning around because I'm like, clearly they don't want my money. Like the aisles are so narrow. Just the structure overall is, and I'm nervous that I am gonna ruin something in my power chair, and I've taken racks down unapologetically so, because it's not not my fault. But I think that just the spacing is really important. I agree with the dressing rooms. I love any the ability to try to take things home. I just in general trying to get dressed in that space as opposed to my home is always more difficult. So refund policies are important. And I think the other thing I was just going to say is it's attitudinal barriers. We say that a lot when it comes to disability inclusion overall, and the fact that more often than there are even physical barriers, it's just the attitudes of retailers, of salespeople that don't make a space feel welcoming. They're often talking to if I come in with my wife, they're going to ask my wife what she wants, okay, how can we help you? Of course, everything is not directed to me as the, consumer. And I think that there, is a lot more even in that space of just the attitudes towards acceptance of of folks with different needs, with disabilities, and the aging community. So much more needs to be done there too.
I have two quick questions because I know we have to end our conversation quite soon. I know that, just across the board, when we're talking about fashion, people don't just want function, they want style, right? And I think, sometimes this is overlooked when we're talking about adaptive or inclusive because we're so concerned about the function of the design. But I was thinking about a good example of a collaboration, and Jimmy, maybe you could talk a little bit about the shirt you're wearing and that super dope print, because that's like a shirt, that's a print that I love, that I would wear. And I'm curious how you came about coming up with it.
Well, thank you. So this is a version of our men's button down. We're actually going to launch this Saturday morning. So if anyone's interested, sign up on our site and you'll get a notification when it goes for sale. We'll have a limited release of this, and we're calling it the Seth because it was designed collaboratively with Seth Rogen. So these are
Go Seth and HFC.
Yeah, really cool. So these are HFC colors. Seth worked on the print, and we have a Lorne coming out probably in about 60 to 90 days, depending on how things work out with our manufacturer. And $10 for each shirt goes back directly to HFC to help families taking care of a loved one with Alzheimer's. So we're so grateful for the partnership and everything that HFC and their team and Seth and Lauren do. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Andrea, I have one other question for you, because I know that obviously your company is so much about social impact and talking with brands. What role do you think advocacy organizations, grassroots movements, community groups play in raising awareness? How do collaborations between these groups with fashion designers help us? And do they help us?
Hugely so. I mean, we again, the whole idea or concept of advocacy, and particularly, engaging with self-advocates, is that we know ourselves best, we know our needs best, and our desires, the best too, right? And I think that speaks to your comment here. Even before that, is that we, at the end of the day, we are people, we're humans. And so, yeah, connecting with, partnering with folks that have the on the ground lived experience is super important, because it demonstrates our humanity and the fact that we want to look good and we want to feel good and we want to, and we don't want to be medicalized. We don't want to be, seen as simply charity cases. Obviously, like, we want to be seen as full humans, and that's the place to start, is with, with the groups, with the organizations that do this on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that it would be interesting to work with designers at the educational level? Let's say, FIT or
Yeah.
SVA, something like that, where you had an interdisciplinary kind of professors teaching together, so that it's not about, again, just what you said, this is not about having a disability and wanting to be a fashionable person. They're
Yeah.
not separate things.
It's
So I think, if we were talking about getting really to the root of this, how could we do that? Nicole, what do you think? Do you think that would be helpful?
Absolutely. And my younger sister went to fashion school in Paris. She's a fashion buyer now. And
wow.
I asked her before we came on the session if she had any sort of formal curriculum that had to do with inclusivity or disabilities. And she was like, no. And I was like, all right, that definitely needs to change, because she went to one of the best schools in the world, and they're producing some of the leading fashion industry professionals, and they need to know about this for sure.
Andrea, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, as a matter of fact, I am serving as an advisor for a program that Parsons actually.
The one school I didn't name in New York City. I'm like, FIT, SVA, Parsons.
So and what I love is that it's a fellowship program, but it's actually for disabled, designers. And I think that's an important aspect too. Of course, we have, again, when we talk about who's at the helm, there's also those of us that want the desire to actually, not just you come to us to tell us just what do you want, but actually we have the creative, the passion, and want to design things for our communities, and perhaps even for the broader, the mainstream as well. And so they have a new, like I said, a new program that'll be starting in the fall, that's a fellowship program for, they're choosing a disabled designer that will have, be able to partner with. And what I love about that is that indeed, you know, they come in and they're getting the education, but we always are in a role of educating others, often even those that are teaching us, you know, just by way of the nature of who we are. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see more investment in our community and creativity in ways like that.
Is this the first program of its kind? Because I haven't heard of anything like this.
Yes, that I know of, and what's lovely is they're thinking about the holistic needs of the person. So for example, they're going to, if you have, you know, require caregiver services, that's a part of the funding. So they haven't even decided the specific amount that they're like, it's based on the person they choose, then they'll adjust the funding based on
Wow.
specific needs. So if it's a deaf person that might need an interpreter, if it's a, you know, a wheelchair user that might need a caregiver or what have you, so that it's not just, because often that is what the barriers are.
Exactly.
It's not to the just, okay, I need the education itself, but it's everything surrounding that, moving to New York City with a disability and like all of that. So it's really innovative, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Oh my, it sounds amazing, because that's true education. That's
Mhm.
not just learn something in a classroom and this is how you can make a shirt. This is all of the things that somebody needs in order to be able to teach, in order to be able to consult. I mean, that is very exciting. Jimmy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that. We actually partnered with Columbia College here in Chicago. They have an amazing design school,
Wow.
and we were essentially their case study for the semester for a class. And the class broke up into teams, and we gave each of them a design challenge. So essentially, we said, "Hey, here are a few things we just can't figure out right now." And it was pretty amazing. First, there was something really beautiful about the idea that the youngest generation that's entering the workforce is designing apparel and products for the oldest generation. So it's sort of forced them to step outside of their comfort zone, but also bring their own unique tastes and interests and ideas that probably aren't being done elsewhere. And it also gave us the ability to use tech that I think a lot of current design firms and apparel firms might not even be aware of yet. And so there's a lot of really cool 3D imaging and renderings that were taking place that allowed us to, and allowed them, frankly, to move a lot quicker and test new ideas a whole lot quicker, and do some 3D printing on potential closure ideas, and take us down paths that otherwise wouldn't have been done. So the idea of bringing in educational community to adaptive in inclusive fashion is really, really important. Because
Yes,
yeah.
I can imagine the tech. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the tech. The one thing that I just wanted to comment on is I love the idea that this entire enterprise could be multi-generational, because Nicole, you're in your 20s, right? And you are caregiving for your mom. Even that, right? Talking about that and the difference between being a young person who is taking care of an older person. Lauren was talking about taking care of her mom, watching her mom take care of her grandmother. There is something I think very important about being able to be empathetic at all ages. And that there is something wonderful about the idea that this kind of education could be, you know, specific in this case study to those who are aging. And an aging population. The over 65 population is going to be the largest population I think we have in just a few years. So it really does, I think, have a great deal of impact on the way that we think about each other, right? We're so quick to be like, I'm Gen X, I'm Gen Z. I don't understand what Riz means, you know, and we're always looking for the things that we don't understand about each other. And what a beautiful way to kind of come together and creatively think about a larger group of people, more people than we tend to think about in our everyday life. I am curious again, what kind of tech, you said 3D renderings, but are there innovations in fabric or fastenings that we should know about?
Yeah, the fabric is incredibly important. And for us, it's where every single product starts. As we age, our skin gets thinner and more delicate and sensitive to the sun. So looking at fabrics that have SPF protection, looking at fabrics that aren't going to cause us to have skin tears or rashes, or then it's also we get colder as we get older. So it's got to have
Yes.
warmth, and it's got to play well with zippers and magnets, and can sew together and handle some weight. So the fabric for us has been the most challenging part. From closures, I'm actually kind of disappointed that there's not as much innovation happening there right now. It tends to be, it started with Velcro, then zippers, now magnets. and those are kind of the big three right now. And I guess snaps to a lesser degree. We're looking at I guess some different techniques. We're inspired a bit by origami right now. So we're trying to see if, hey, can we just fold clothes in interesting ways as opposed to adding anything new to it? Because part of the reason I love magnets, but one of the negatives is you can't wear it with a pacemaker. So it isn't fully inclusive. So we do want to continue to test. The other thing is I think there are opportunities when it comes to 3D printing and creating essentially closures out of the fabric itself, and allowing clothes to essentially be sewn together in ways that a human hasn't been able to do before. And so that those are things that we're looking into. I think it's a little bit out there, but we'll get there.
So exciting. I guess I want to leave with your final thoughts here. If you had one wish to come out of this conversation, what would you want this audience, particularly of caregivers, to continue to think about as you continue to think about how to create adaptive and inclusive fashion in a way that becomes commonplace?
Yeah.
Nicole, why don't you start? Oh, sorry, Jimmy, go ahead.
Okay. So I would say, look, there's a lot that is inherently hard or maybe even unfair about aging and in our bodies changing and our emotions changing and our abilities changing. Clothing just shouldn't be one of those things. And our personal identity, even when we are living with Alzheimer's or other forms of changing levels of cognition, that doesn't fully go away. So everyone has a right to look and feel like themselves, and just
Hear,
try
hear.
to avoid hospital attire.
And Nicole, your thoughts?
I think I would just like people to know that we are heading in the right direction, and there are already a lot of resources out there. You just have to look for them and find the people that can connect you with them. And yeah, I think I just want everybody to be proud of themselves where they're at. So.
And I know, Jimmy, there are a couple of people in the chat who asked if they could connect with you. So I just wanted to let you know. And Andrea, I'd like to end with you. Final thoughts?
I was just thinking about the power of interdependence. Often, it's we see, a singular role very singularly, but our interdependence on one another. I myself, as a 40-year-old person who my wife is my caregiver, which is a little bit different, but in order for me to get up and go to work today, she supports me and then I support, in different ways. And I think if we continue to just value that, even in terms of looking at things like fashion, and how we can support one another and ultimately being our fullest selves, then we win.
Amen. Thank you, Jimmy, Andrea, Nicole. Obviously, I know there are probably a ton of people who are going to want to get in touch with you. I encourage you to just check in with everybody in the chat about where they can find you, just so all the people with us today will know that. And thank you to HFC. Thank you for asking me to moderate. This was so inspiring and so exciting. I can't wait to see what comes. So looking forward, and I'm hopeful that I can maybe come visit that person's class.
Yes, don't worry.
I would be thrilled. I would be absolutely thrilled. I'm in New York. I'm here. I'm ready to go.
Yes, awesome.
Guys, thank you so much. I'm going to direct everybody back to the lobby where the Scotty Awards are about to take place in 5 minutes. That probably gives you a chance to run to the bathroom or get a glass of water. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.